Uh, Hi again, everybody. I'm back again. Today, I'm kind of hopeful this will be a short video, but every time I say that, I look at the clock at the end and it's about 15 minutes. But this is a fairly concise topic, so I shouldn't be able to go on too long. It's the idea of population pyramids. Population pyramids are graphical representation of the population demographics, usually of an individual country. Above my head, I've put some keywords, and these basically just relate to what we've talked about already. So a population pyramid can give you some indications, not necessarily hard figures, but an indication of, for a country, its crude birth rate, its crude death rate, the total fertility rate, the doubling time of the population, and the natural increase rate. Um, my intention is I'll just start by giving you a brief overview of what a population pyramid shows, and then I've got four case studies of four very different countries, so we can compare a population pyramid of each of those places. Okay, this is a population pyramid for Ethiopia, which obviously you know is an LEDC, quite a poor country. Before we go into the specifics of Ethiopia, I'll just say a few things about what a population pyramid can show in general, regardless of which country you're looking at. First of all, the x-axis shows you the size of the population. In this case, they've given it as the percentage of the total population. It could also be in numbers as well. And the y-axis, it splits the population up into age groups. And usually it's in 5-year intervals. So I don't know if you can see on the video when I upload it, but the first stage here shows you the age groups of 0 to 4 years. The next stage is 5 to 9 years. The next stage 10 to 14. The next one 15 to 19, and so on. So we're going up in 5-year blocks, or 5-year age blocks. The graph is split into two, usually in pink and blue. Now, I don't know if you know this is, if you think it's sexist, but obviously that's supposed to represent female population in pink, the male population in blue. Just a couple of other things. Obviously you know this. Biologically speaking, when you're born, you have precisely a 50-50 chance of being male or female. Not the case as you get to old age, because genetically speaking, women have higher age expectancy than men. You have more chance of getting to old age if you're a woman. Okay. Why are they important? Well, population pyramids are very important for any government because it's very difficult to make decisions about economic policy specifically if you don't know how your population is structured. For example, do you have a big enough young population to support, economically speaking, the older population? That's more important when we get to MEDCs that specifically have economies that are looking for younger working people to be supporting an older generation, economically speaking. All right, so let's look at Ethiopia specifically. This is the total population size at the top. The first thing you notice is it's got a very wide base. It's kind of an obvious pyramid shape. The wider base basically tells you that the crude birth rate is high. There's a number of factors that play into that. It could be lack of family planning, in some cases lack of sex education, tradition. It is very traditional in Ethiopia for people to have large numbers of children, actually for good reasons, and certainly in the past. Because it's a very rural population, families needed large numbers of children to look after family farms, basically to feed their families. There could be religious aspects that mean that women, not necessarily in Ethiopia, but in some cases women don't have control over their own fertility rate. We've spoken about that before. What else can we say? Quite steeply sloping sides in this case. That suggests that basically there's quite a rapid die-off of people at every age group as you go through. And the pointed tip suggests that Ethiopian people, there's a low life expectancy and there's not a great chance of getting to very old age in that country. Um, you have to be a bit careful here because I was going to say that that's indicative of a high crude death rate, and it possibly is. But in some cases, MEDCs and richer countries actually have very high death rates because if they have a very old population, there's a very high chance of getting to old age. Those people that tend to die off together at the same kind of time. So that can contribute to a high death rate as well. So it would appear Ethiopia has a high crude birth rate, suggestive of a high crude death rate. The big base suggests that there's a very high total fertility rate. We could look that up and find exactly what the total fertility rate of Ethiopia is, but I suspect it's high. You would expect the doubling time for this country to be fairly low, and the natural increase rate to be high. So I said the death rate might be fairly high. It's suggestive that in Ethiopia, healthcare provision is not that great, but it's certainly improving over recent years. But certainly people living there don't have access to the same kind of healthcare as you'd expect in MEDCs. Okay, I don't think I can say much more about that, so let's look to another example. Okay, this is India. India is classed as another LEDC. In some ways it's a similar shape, sloping sides, but you can see here a big difference is that you don't have that very high base that we saw in Ethiopia. That's suggestive of a lower crude birth rate and probably a lower total fertility rate. But that possibly means that certainly women have more control over their own fertility. In India, you have, I guess women have, in generally speaking, women have more opportunity to work rather than staying at home to have families. They can make those choices. Possibly better access to family planning, contraception. But one thing you might notice here, it's actually fairly visible on the base. The pink side of the younger generations does seem smaller, and certainly numerically speaking, smaller than the blue side. Now, I already said there's exactly a 50-50 chance of being born male or female. So if those don't match up to probably within 0.1% or less, that's indicative that something strange is happening there. And it's actually suggestive that people are deciding to have male children rather than female children. And it's probably indicative actually of selective abortion of girls over boys, unfortunately. Okay, what else can we say? The sides here slope less steeply, so that suggests better healthcare provision, better access to medicine. Okay, and it's probably actually also related to much less of a rural population and people moving more towards living in towns and cities, and therefore having more access to modern healthcare. Okay, I'll leave you to make your own notes and your own decisions about what that means in terms of the keywords above my head. I'll try and move on fairly rapidly. Okay, this is the United States of America. Again, you can see this transition from the Ethiopian model to this kind of model. Narrow base, in fact more narrow than India, and I know that the United States is actually just about at the at 2.1 children per woman total fertility rate, which means they've reached the replacement rate. That's pretty much ideal for a government because it means you have a stable population where older people are being replaced by younger people. The obvious thing here is very straight-sided pyramid. You have pretty much an excellent chance, male and female, of getting to old age as you move through these cohorts, and then people die off as you reach old age. Obviously, that's indicative again of good access to healthcare. Although obviously you know that there's a huge debate going on in the US at the moment about whether all people have access to the same level of healthcare there. You might get a different pyramid if you look at different ethnic groups, for example, in the United States, or different levels of affluence or poverty. So narrow base, fairly low birth rate. Obviously, people have access to contraception, sex education, abortion. Um, we can't see really a difference between male and female population sizes there, although it does appear slightly in favour of the male population. It's very obvious at the top actually that the female population has a higher life expectancy than the male population. Again, that's just down to genetics. I said it's a good situation for a government to be in because you have a high number of young people supporting a high number of old people. Okay, and again, before we move on, obviously women in the US have much more opportunity to make decisions about their own fertility rates. Okay, so fairly low crude birth rate, fairly low crude death rate, I would suggest. Fertility rate is low but stable. I don't know what we can say about the doubling time exactly. I don't know what it is for the US, and neither the natural increase rate. We'd have to do the calculations to find out. Okay, final example. Well, you might think that's 3 examples and that's possibly the 3 types of shape you can expect. Here's a slightly different one from a country you might not expect. This is the population pyramid for Japan. Very strange shape. In some ways similar to the US, with the obvious difference that you have this very narrow base at the bottom. And what's happened in Japan is that as far as the government is concerned, the crude birth rate has dropped too much. Obviously, in Japan, women have their own choices that they can make about their fertility rates, but the fertility rate in Japan has dropped below the replacement rate, which means, coupled with a high life expectancy, there's a very high number of old people being supported by a small number of people of working age. You can see there. So Japan is at a crossroads here where they're trying to encourage more women basically to have more children so that they have enough people of working age to support the older population. Okay, that's about it. One thing I might have forgotten, if I just flip back to the US, there's a couple of bumps on this graph. One is this kind of generation between the ages of about 60 and 70. I would suggest that's the holdover from the baby boom generation, where the crude birth rate increased very rapidly for one generation. And there's another bump here, specifically males between the age of approximately, I would say, 20 to 34, 35. That probably indicates an influx of people, immigration, specifically of men of working age. And it's quite interesting, not a huge increase by the way, but it's noticeable. If you look at the Mexican population, for men of the same age, you can see a little bite has been taken out the side of the pyramid there as men of working age possibly move away from Mexico into the US. But let's not go into the politics of that. Okay, I think that's about as much as I want to say at the moment about population pyramids. We're going to look next at how they feed into a model, and I hope that you could see that there's a transition from the kind of shape we saw for Ethiopia through to the kind of shape we saw in Japan. As crude birth rates change, crude death rates change, and access to healthcare changes. That's going to be important when we move on to the next part. Okay, I don't want to go on anymore. I hope everybody's okay, and again, as I say every single time, look after yourself and your family, and I'll speak to you soon. Okay, bye everybody.